Hi, everyone. Welcome to Life Changing Moments with the Net. Today's guest is truly special. He is actually the first guest I have ever reached out to and the first person who said yes to be interviewed just before I created my YouTube channel. His name is Jeffery Olsen. Jeffrey Olsen is a best selling author who inspires audiences internationally with his intriguing story of perseverance and inner strength. After a horrific automobile accident took the lives of his wife and youngest son, also inflicting multiple life threatening injuries to Jeff, including the amputation of his left leg. He found the courage to survive over 18 surgeries and eventually healed both physically and emotionally. At this time of his accident, Olsen had incredible out of body and near death experiences, bringing him insights not common in today's world. Jeff has integrated these experiences with many healing modalities and now shares those with others as he works to bring forth awareness, healing, and oneness. Olson's latest book, Knowing, is a compilation of his earlier books with even deeper insights and extended chapters. Knowing can be found on Amazon in all formats. Amongst Jeff's many accomplishments, he is most fulfilled by simply being a husband, father, and friend. So let's welcome him, the amazing Jeffrey Olsen. My channel, Life Changing Moments with Annette. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Oh, it's such an honor to be with you, and I can't wait to get into our conversation. We talked about my near-death experience, my out-of-body experience, and I was explaining that this actually happened 24 years ago. So it's been a while, and yet at the time, I couldn't talk about it. It was too painful, it was too personal, and it was also something I had to process in my life. And the cause of my near-death experience was actually a horrific automobile accident. Our whole family was in the car. We had taken a little vacation, a road trip, as we call it here in the US. And it was me, my wife, and our two sons. And we had gone to southern Utah with the red rock, beautiful arches, scenery, and also to visit my wife's parents who were living down there. Yeah, so the whole family was on vacation in southern Utah. We were all in the car, and it was on the way back from that we had a horrific accident. Now, there was reports of crosswinds. There was reports of a big red truck, driving erratically on the interstate. I think one of the most difficult things to talk about is I may have just nodded off, just dozed off at the wheel for just a second, where you kind of nod off. But what had happened is I swerved to the right, I overcorrected to the left, and the car began to roll, not off the road, but down the road. So high speed on concrete on the interstate, the highway. And the accident reports say that the car probably rolled no less than 6 to 8 times. It was a horrific automobile accident. And it's sometimes still difficult to talk about. Even though this much time has passed, I couldn't talk about it for some time. I would just cry. It was very difficult. When the car came to a stop, I blacked out for most of the crash. When the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious. And the first thing I heard was my son, my 7-year-old son in the back seat, crying. But it was that cry a father knows. It's like, oh, I've got to get to my son. I've got to get to my son. And that's when I realized that I could not move. I was pinned either to the seat or the floorboard. I couldn't tell. I was struggling to breathe. I was in pain. I was unaware of my injuries. What had actually happened is that both of my legs had been crushed and shattered. My left leg was eventually amputated above the knee because of the injuries to it. My back had been damaged and broken. My spinal column wasn't damaged. I wasn't paralyzed, but it broke a couple of vertebrae. My rib cage had been damaged. My lungs were collapsing. And then the seatbelt had cut through my midsection and ruptured all my insides. I wasn't aware of any of that. I knew I was in pain. I knew I was struggling to breathe. All I knew is my son was crying and I wanted to get to him. But that's when I realized that no one else was crying. And that's when I knew that my youngest son, Griffin, just a toddler at the time, he was only 14 months old, that both he and then my wife, who was in the seat next to me in the passenger seat, they were both killed instantly in the accident. And that was a dark moment. That may be the most dark moment of my life. I mean, there I am. I'm pinned in the car. I'm losing consciousness. I've got a hysterical 7-year-old still buckled up in the back, and yet half the family is gone. My youngest son and my wife are deceased. I can't move, and I'm losing consciousness. I was attempting to comfort my son, who I couldn't get to. You know, as he's crying, I was able to say to him, I said, "Son, it's going to be okay." And I thought, wow, that's a lie. It's not okay. You know, it's not okay. I'm struggling to even stay awake. Half the family has been killed, and I was driving the car. The guilt and the regret and the trauma. I just kept thinking, can't I get that 3 seconds back? I mean, how do I roll this clock back? What just happened? And it was in that darkest moment, and I'm telling him it's going to be okay, that an interesting thing happened. Light came. I say it felt as if light came, tangible light came and surrounded me. And it was comforting me. It was comforting me, and it felt as if I was rising above the accident, like I was being delivered out of all that trauma in that scene. And suddenly the pain was gone. Suddenly I could breathe just fine. I had no trouble breathing. And my thought was, how can I possibly be okay? What is going on? It was a little bit confusing. What is happening here? And what had happened is my soul, my spirit had actually left my body. I was held in this bubble of light, if you will. And the interesting thing that took place is I was there thinking, how can I possibly be okay? Suddenly, Tamara, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, she was there in the light with me. And she was gorgeous. There was no injuries. She was radiant and beautiful. And yet she was communicating to me. She was saying, no, you can't come. You've got to go back. And we actually had a conversation. We had a conversation about if I came with her, our little boy in that back seat would be orphaned, and that I needed to come back and he be a parent to him. And I learned a lot about choice in that interaction. I mean, here I was looking at the woman I loved more than life, and yet I knew I had a son in the backseat of that car. And we decided together, and I made the choice that I would come back. I chose to come back, and it was interesting in choosing. We have no idea how powerful our thoughts are. I mean, it was that intent that I'm going back. I didn't have to figure out how to go back. As I made that decision and said the most profound goodbye I'll ever say, I found myself wandering through a hospital, moving freely about a hospital. Now, I have no concept of time, in this bubble of light, this goodbye. I later found out people had arrived at the scene of the accident. And Spencer, my 7-year-old, who was crying, he had broken his wrist and his ribs were bruised up, but he physically walked away from the accident. They were able to get him out of the car. But emotionally, he thought the whole family was gone. I had to be extricated from the car. And because of the extent of my injuries, I was life flighted or airlifted to the nearest level 1 trauma center. I had no idea of any of that. All I knew is I had crashed the car. I had left my body. I had said the most profound goodbye I'll ever say. And then I made the choice to come back. And here I am moving about the hospital. And I'm seeing the patients, the doctors, the nurses, the families of the patients. I'm seeing everyone as I'm moving about the hospital, but I'm seeing them in such a profound way. I mean, I'm seeing them as if they were me. There was this connection. I now call it the oneness. I was in this profound oneness. Everyone I saw, I knew them perfectly. I knew their love, their hate, their motivations, their challenges. I knew them as if they were me. I was experiencing them as if we were universally connected, and yet it was coupled with this unconditional love. You know, this incredible unconditional love. I knew them perfectly, and I had this overwhelming adoration. And it didn't matter who they were or what they had done or hadn't done. Everything from the heroin addict to the saintly grandmother, the doctors, the nurses. You know, one particular nurse just moved by me. I moved past her, and they seemed to be completely unaware of me, but I was aware of them in a very profound way. But I felt her life. I felt her experience. I felt specifically, I felt the abuse that she had endured as a child, you know, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. I experienced that in a moment as she passed. And yet in that same moment, I experienced her magnificence. It's like, wow, look at her. Look at what she has become. Look at what she's doing. She's in a hospital serving and healing, and what a magnificent soul, you know, perhaps because of what she had experienced, not in spite of it. It was, I mean, everyone I encountered, there was this profound awe, like, wow, they are so incredible. And I finally came upon a body laying on the gurney that I didn't feel anything from, which I thought was profound. So I stepped closer to look, and that's when I realized, oh my gosh, that's me. But that wasn't me. I was having this profound connected experience, but there was my body. And it was so broken. I mean, it was so horribly broken. And yet I knew that I was to get back in. I'd made the choice to come back, and I knew I'm getting back in the body. And that was difficult. Not difficult to do. Again, our thoughts, our intentions are so powerful. All I had to do was choose, I'm going back in, and then boom, I was back in the body. But back to the guilt, the regret, the trauma, the pain, the grief, the emotional burden. And the physical pain was intense, but it was nothing compared to the emotional, you know, grief and almost panic that half the family's gone, and I was driving the car. And I was ventilated. They had a big tube, you know, down my throat doing the breathing for my lungs. My right arm was immobile because it had almost been torn off in the accident. My legs, having both been crushed, they were immobile. And they eventually tied down my left hand because I kept grabbing at the medical equipment. But I learned a whole new meaning to be still. I had no choice. I just had to lay there and wallow in what had happened, and also contemplate this out of body, this near-death experience, which didn't end. I mean, I was in the hospital for over 5 months. I had 18 surgeries in total, putting me back together. And it's like that door never shut. I had some continued communication with my wife who had passed. My son who passed, this was horrible, and I don't mean to share this to be graphic, but in the accident, as the car rolled, what had happened is we had him buckled up safe in a car seat, as you do little ones. Mm-hmm. But the car seat had broken apart. It was broken apart, and it had let him out, and he had been ejected from the car. And at the scene of the accident, I was like, where's my little boy? And I knew, like spirit, it's like he is gone. So I knew he was gone. But those months of laying there and having these strange, I would feel the doctors and nurses, I would feel their souls. I had incredible dreams or connections and communications with my wife, Tamara, even about the services. She let me know what songs she wanted sung. She let me know silly, trivial things. I want my rings to go to my cousin and to my niece. And I mean, we were having these communications. It's all in the book, Knowing. But I'd had nothing of my little son. And it was traumatic, as it would be for anyone. But the hospital was a long, hard haul. It was difficult. The physical trauma was intense, but it had nothing, the emotional trauma was far more intense. And perhaps the most profound thing that happened was at the end of my hospital stay. I mean, I had horrible infections because of the way my insides had all been ruptured and everything going on that way. I kept throwing pulmonary emboli, or the blood clots that lodge in your lungs, and I had pneumonias, and I would go from ICU to surgical recovery back to ICU. I was in and out of consciousness for much of that. I was heavily on morphine too, which, you wonder how that might affect it. I think it's worthwhile to point out my most profound experiences were at the scene of the accident before any narcotics had been administered.
Yeah.
And then at the end of my hospital stay, I mean, I've been there for almost 5 months, and I'm at the end of my hospital stay. I've gone out of ICU through surgical recovery. I was actually in the rehabilitation unit. And I was only a week or so from coming home. But I fell into a deep sleep one night. And when I say that, I hadn't slept for months. I mean, I had been unconscious, but they had finally stabilized my abdominal, injuries and the intestines, and they put a colostomy bag in order, and I could finally lay on my side. Mm-hmm. And it's fun. I'd laid on my back so long, I'd rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. The back of my head was bald, but I could finally at this point lay on my side. And my brothers, my family was incredible. They were teasing me about my bald head on the back. And they would sit with me. I mean, they knew how miserably I was grieving. And this particular night, I fell into a peaceful sleep. In fact, I recall thinking, wow, I'm in a peaceful sleep. I don't know that I've really slept for months, and I'm in a peaceful, restful sleep, laying on my side, which was my natural way of sleeping. And yet, while I was having that thought of I'm in a deep, peaceful, beautiful sleep, that light came again. The same light that had come at the scene of the accident. And I felt as if I was being risen above the hospital bed. And it was that same comforting love that was like tangible light. But this time the light dispensed. It went away, and I was in the most incredibly beautiful place. It was so real. And in fact, I began running. Now, I don't run in this life with one leg missing and the other one's got 6 pins and a plate holding it together. But I began joyfully running, and it was such a physical experience. It was beyond physical. It's like my senses were multiplied. I could feel the intelligence in my calves and feet and thighs as I ran, and I could feel the love and energy from the ground beneath my feet. And I was literally giddy. I was giggling, laughing. And, people say heaven or the spirit world or the other side, that there's only one word that comes close to what I was experiencing. And that is, I was home. I was home. I was so welcomed. It was so beautiful. It was so familiar. I was home. And I was running joyfully, just taking it all in, when I had the knowing that I wasn't there to stay. And there was this corridor off to my left. And I knew intuitively I'm to go that way. I'm to go down this corridor. And I began working my way down the corridor. And I realized there was a crib at the end of the corridor. Now, my little Griffin had been sleeping in a crib at only 14 months old at the time of the accident. And I raced to the crib. And I looked in, and there was my little boy. And he was sleeping beautifully. He was perfect. And I swept him up. I picked him up and I held him. I don't know if you've ever picked up a sleeping child.
I have three of my own.
Oh, okay. So I mean, I picked him up in the heat and the weight of them, and it was so real. I'm telling you, that was real. This is the cloudy, crazy dream. And again, my senses. Oh, I picked him up. I could feel the life in every cell of his body, which was solid against me. And I kept thinking, how can this be? But I could feel him breathing as I held him, and I could feel his breath on my neck. And I leaned over and I smelled his hair.
Oh.
I mean, have you ever smelled the hair of a loved one? I mean, and all of it was, and I'm saying this because it was such a physical experience. Like, it was him. I was there. I was holding him. I just began weeping. I just began weeping. And as I wept, I felt this presence coming up behind me. And it was so overwhelming. It was so cosmic, and it was so powerful. And I'd grown up in a conservative Christian home, and what I was feeling is, wow, that's God coming. It was so intense, and I could feel this presence coming closer and closer, and I began to feel fearful. The guilt. I was holding. I thought I felt I'm holding my little boy, and he's here because I crashed the car. His life was cut short because I dozed off at the wheel, and and the presence was coming closer and closer. And as I felt it so close, and I'm crying, holding my little boy, I had this thought. And the thought was, I hope I can be forgiven. I hope there's somehow I can be forgiven. And as I had that thought, and this felt physical as well, these divine arms just wrapped around and held me and my little boy. And then the lid came off. There was just this download of love and peace and beauty and truth and connection. And in fact, I had that thought, I hope I can be forgiven. And the first communication, and it was just non-verbal, it was like a virtual download, was, there's nothing to forgive. Your life is in perfect divine order. And then I saw the life review. I saw my life, and I kept thinking, well, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. And then this beautiful being, God, if you will, was saying, there are no mistakes. What did you learn? Your life's in order. And then I'd say, well, yeah, but I that was wrong, and I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. And it was communicated to me, that's your judgment of it, not ours. We love you. You are as precious to the universe as that little boy you hold. And I mean, here's my son. He's perfect. He's divine. He's beloved, and yet I'm feeling that magnified through this creator that is saying, you are all loved like that. What you're feeling from your son and what you're feeling from me, it was a very personal experience, but that was the love of every human soul, every divine soul. We're all divine. We're far greater than human. That's what I learned, is we are manifestations of the divine. And I was experiencing that in such a profound way. And I was given a choice. In fact, this communication was incredible. And I was told I could be mad at God my whole life, because half the family was taken away or passed away. I could also feel guilty and beat myself up the rest of my life because I was driving the car. Or I was given a third choice, which I hadn't considered. And God said to me, you can give me your son. You can hand him over. You can exercise your will. And of course, my upbringing, I said, well, I thought it was your will be done. And yet what was communicated is that your will is my will. That's how much we love you. And you can hand over your son. You can trust and hand him over and exercise your will in this situation. And in all that love and peace and beauty, I was able to kiss my little boy and hand him over to God and make that part of my choice. And then I was back in the body, to the broken body, the amputation, the wheelchair, everything that was going on. But I had a little different perspective. And, I don't want anyone to think that I had these profound experiences and I was okay. I mean, I had the horrible accident. I had absolutely profound experiences, but then I grieved like any parent or spouse or father would. I mean, it was a long, rocky road, but I learned a lot, and it never really ended. I mean, I eventually did get well. I eventually was able to return home. And that was incredible. I mean, Spencer, my little 7-year-old that survived the accident, what an incredible person. I mean, he had lost everything I lost. He lost his mother, his brother. In many ways, he'd lost his father, right? I remember coming home to him, and this is key. I want to share this. My brothers, they would literally have to lift me into the wheelchair with one leg cut off and the other one in a brace and my right arm in a sling. And all I could do is I could put me in an electric wheelchair and I could drive it with my one left hand that worked. And they were going to bring me home. I wasn't going to my home. I had to go stay with my brother. There was continued home health care and all kinds of therapy. And gosh, they were so good. They'd cleared out an extra room. They'd put a hospital bed in there for me. They'd taken in Spencer, my 7-year-old son, as if he was one of their own. And they brought me home from the hospital. And as they did, I watched. We pulled up to the house, and there was Spencer watching out the window, watching as his uncles, my brothers, lifted me, his dad, into the wheelchair. And I began to navigate toward the ramp. They'd built me a ramp. They were emphatic that I do it myself. You've got to become independent. And I began to navigate the little electric wheelchair over to the ramp. And Spencer came running out of the house, and he ran toward me. But he ran right past me. And I thought, oh, dear, I knew this would be hard. I mean, here's his father with one leg, braces, tubes, colostomy bag. I mean, I thought, I know this is too much for him to handle. He can't, and he ran off, and I began to turn the chair, to navigate it up the ramp. And I just looked over my shoulder to see where he went. And actually he had run across the street, and he was knocking on all the neighbors' doors. And he began to shout, come out. My dad has made it home. My dad is home. Come out and see my dad. And I burst into tears again. And, he knocked on all the doors, and then he ran, and he did jump on my lap, which just about killed me because I still had all the sutures, from the abdominal repair. And he threw his arms around me. And I share this specifically because suddenly there I was, and I said, son, I'm going to work so hard to get well, but I'm going to be like this for a while. And are you going to be okay with this? I mean, I'm going to need your help. And we still laugh about this. He's a grown man now. In fact, he's married, and his journey is incredible. It's all in the book Knowing, and you can get the details of how we manage that.
I'm going to post it on the link description below. So
beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, there's so much more to it than I can cover today. But I said, are you going to be able to handle this? And he said, Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I would still love you. And here's the beautiful thing. There I was in a wheelchair, all broken, both emotionally, spiritually, physically. And yet I realized being in that wheelchair and holding my surviving son in this realm was no less divine than being in the other realm, holding my son who had passed. Suddenly heaven was right here. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to become. It was simply to be in that perfect moment and feel this unconditional love of my surviving child, which was every bit as divine as the unconditional love of a creator or God. I mean, it was profound for me to realize, wow, maybe heaven is right here if we choose to experience it that way.
Yeah, I think happiness is a choice.
Yeah.
Life on earth is not easy, but it's the way we look at it and we handle things.
I love how you say that. Happiness is a choice. I learned that in a profound way. I mean, we eventually got back home. I mean, I worked very hard. They eventually fitted me with a prosthetic limb. I learned to walk again, and I had canes and walkers and other things. They were able to fix the colostomy, and I could finally go to the bathroom like a real man, which was everything was a miracle. Everything was a blessing. Suddenly, I had so much appreciation for every sunrise. It's like, wow, look at that. thank you for another day. And I had miracles happen. I mean, miracles. And maybe one of the biggest miracles is my current wife, Tanya. I eventually fell in love again. And that's a whole nother long story. I felt guilty about that. I mean, I and so I did date. I wasn't looking. Tanya came into our lives in a beautiful way.
I think personally, your wife sent Tanya.
Well, she did. I don't know if you've read the whole book, but I felt guilty about this, and I was angry that I was alone. I went to my first wife's grave. I was on her grave crying, and I was in the mood for a fight. I'm like, how dare you? How could you leave me like this? How could you go? And as I'm pouring my soul out on her grave, I felt her. She came to me. I didn't see her with my eyes, but I felt her behind me, and she put her hands on my shoulders as I'm hunched over, sobbing and swearing at her, saying, how could you leave me like this? And it was so interesting because she communicated to me and she said, I loved you enough to leave. And I'm like, you loved me enough to leave? What do you mean? And she said, Jeff, don't you remember? And I didn't. We had a plan. There was an agreement. There was a contract. Your soul came to expand in intense ways. And I would have loved nothing more than to stay and grow old with you. But I loved you enough to go, that you would get and experience and learn and gain what you came here to get. And I thought, wow. And then I was still in the fight mood. I said, well, by the way, I'm having feelings for another woman. I'm here limping around on a cane. I'm attempting to raise our son, and you're gone. And now I'm having feelings for this other woman. And she actually laughed at me. She laughed and said, of course you are. She said, of course you are. I know who you are. I know how you are. And she did. She said, I put Tanya in your path. She said, I'm here as your guardian angel, attempting to orchestrate a life for you. And this is where it comes back to just what you said.
My question is, how did she communicate with you? Was it telepathic or?
I could hear her voice in my heart as if she was talking to me. I don't know if it was in my ears, but it felt like it was in my ears and right in my heart. And she said to me, you can choose whoever you want, but I want you to choose joy. That's what she said. Choose joy. She kind of said, Jeff, you're a good dad, but you're a horrible mother. And our little boy needs a mom. And I want you to choose joy. And she said, I know Tanya's heart. I could see differently from this realm. And she's a good woman. And she said, I'm okay with it. I'm not, suddenly it's like I had her permission. She's like, please go have a life. And in fact, she said, I'm held hostage in your grief. I can only be as happy as you are. And I'm watching you. And I want
you so much, Jeff.
I want
happiness for you. And this is a very nice love story. I'm sorry if I'm in tears because I haven't heard this. So thank you so much for sharing. And I can feel your pain and your guilt. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that you're saying this.
Well, you can see how I couldn't speak of it for years. I mean, it's been 24 years since the accident. It's been, 20 years or so since this experience. And Tanya is the hero of the story. My current wife, what an incredible soul, She came in and we were just friends at first. I had told her I will never love again. My heart is broken. I will never be the same. I can't even walk right. And it was all about Tamara and my loss and Griffin and my loss. And when we began to realize, wow, there's something more here than a friendship. And when I began to fall in love with her, I even said to her, how can this be? Because all I've told you is I love this other woman and I'll never be the same. And how are you going to deal with that? And, and Tanya is such an incredible soul. She said, Jeff, that's half the attraction, knowing you can love at that level. She said, I don't have to marry a one-legged guy with a son. I have other options, but there's something about your inner strength, your heart, that I've fallen in love with. And it's funny as this thing progressed, and all of a sudden we're in a relationship, and wow, we're talking about getting married. And I began to take pictures of Tamara down in the house. I began to put things away. And, I just thought, out of respect for Tanya, I've got to let go. And it was interesting. Tanya came over one day and she realized I was putting a lot of pictures away, taking them down. This is her character. She said, Jeff, she said, don't dare take them all down. She said, that little boy deserves a picture of his mom.
Exactly.
And this is her character. And then we started this new life, this relationship. We adopted 2 boys, and we don't even call them our adopted boys. They just came into our family. Yeah, they're just my sons, but the miracles. And that's what I can't stress. I mean, suddenly for me, gosh, I see a snowflake. It's snowing here today. It's beautiful.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's snow. Everything is beautiful. And life still has its challenges. It always will. But I instead of asking why me, if I can say, wow, what am I learning? What am I learning through this experience? That's where I can begin to get at a deeper emotional level and realize that it's all love. It's all love.
That's what I like from you, because from your horrific experiences, you took you learned from it, and like you are doing now, you want to help people, and you are a public speaker, and that's what I like from this story. You did not stay to be always in it. Yes, of course, it took a lot of time. Right. And that's also normal. You lost 2 loved ones who meant a lot to you. So I cannot say anything about that. For me, you are a miracle, a hero, an inspiration, really, because
thank you.
18 surgeries, you said, or 13?
Yes, 18. 18 surgeries.
I cannot even imagine with 1 surgery already. I work in the hospital. So, yeah, and then ICU too. So I know what you've been through. And I feel you. Since I have my awakening, I became an empath. I feel people, and I've always felt, but now it's even more. And while you're telling your story, I'm so touched, and
oh, you're so kind. You're so kind. And it's a beautiful thing. Empathy, empath.
From empathy. Yeah.
Empathy it's a beautiful thing. It's a good thing. That's what I gained. Empathy, and it's brought compassion. And my brother I'm still very close to my brothers. And my younger brother was teasing me. He says, why do you do all this stuff? You're out speaking. And I never had any intention of writing a book. I never had any intention of talking about this publicly. In fact, that was all very spiritual. I was approached by a publisher. They approached me about writing a book, and I told them no. And it's funny, Tanya, again, my current wife, she's the hero. She said, Jeff, maybe you want to ask this God, this creator. And she took me back, and I asked her to. She took me back to the scene of the accident. And, she said, just spend some time. And I did. And I prayed. I pray. I'm a guy that prays. And I don't profess to talk to God every day, but I got a profound answer to this. I can tell you exactly what it's, that voice that whispers to your heart. I was told, share your experience and others will heal. And boy, did I want others to heal. This was 10 years after the fact. I had done some healing myself. And that's when I thought, well, all right, I'll share, and I'll honor this contract, and I'll write the book. And I was scared to death because I didn't fancy myself a writer. And I wrote the book and worked with the publisher. And in the end, I thought, well, my mother will buy a copy. It doesn't matter. Nobody's going to buy the book, right? And then it hit number 3 in the category on Amazon in 10 days. And I was being asked to speak all over the world. But I could have never done it, but I realized it had nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with me. It has to do with love. It has to do with healing, and it has to do with each person's individual journey. And if I can walk with them, if I can in some way be a manifestation of the unconditional love I experienced, then that's my purpose. That's my role. And yeah, I would have never guessed. And my brother, he's like, well, you're doing all this stuff, and you're getting older, and I still deal with pain. I mean, there's all kinds of pain in my body and other things. But I said, if I can make something positive out of the tragedy. And
can you still do you still feel your wife now, or do you still dream about her, or like this?
I do. In fact, it's funny. Tanya, my current wife, has had interactions with Tamara, my first wife. They never knew each other in this realm, but she has had dreams and things happen. I mean, before the boys, we adopted these boys. We never applied for adoption. They came into our lives in a very profound way. And Tanya, my current wife, had a dream before they came, but just slightly before they came, because it all happened very quickly. And Tamara, my first wife, came to her in a dream and gave her these packages and shared her love and adoration for what she was doing. And she said, you're going to need these. And in the dream, Tanya opened the packages, and it was baby clothes. It was onesies and baby bottles, and and it's like, oh, are we going to become pregnant? That's and yet in the following weeks, all of a sudden, this adoption, it literally fell into our laps in a profound way.
What a gift!
Yeah, and it's all in divine order. It's all meant to be. So yes, I do. And even Griffin, my son, comes to me in dreams, but he's no longer the little toddler. He comes to me as this magnificent guardian, this young man, this
really?
beautiful, yes, strong young man. And that's been interesting too. I'm very connected to them, and they're very connected to me. And
Very nice.
And I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky that way.
You mentioned, Jeff, you felt this, someone was embracing you from the back when you held your baby.
Yeah.
Could you see the face? Didn't you turn or curious who it was, or you just felt like, okay, it's God?
No, I'm going to grab a tissue. You've got me crying now. No, here's the funny thing. I was afraid to turn around. When I say funny, that was my experience. Like, ooh, that's God, and I'm in trouble. That was my belief.
The guilt.
I was afraid to turn around. I don't know what or who I might have encountered if I turned around, but I didn't ever turn around. I didn't look. I didn't see. I just felt, and it was such a beautiful thing. I didn't need to see. And I, you could say, well, that's God, that's the creator, that's my higher self, that's the I am presence. There's probably 1,000 names, and yet it's unnameable. To me, I call it God, and yet it was so loving. And it felt as if the entire universe was embracing me. I can't, there aren't words to describe the experience.
Such a profound experience. I mean,
Yeah.
Feeling, huh?
Yeah.
Yes. You mentioned, like, there's only one word you can describe it, going there. I mean, the feeling there. So you said home. And this is not the first time I've heard people saying it feels like home. So what do you think? Why you said home? You think that we were there before, or we really belong there? How is Earth to you now after knowing there is a home there?
Oh, it's a great question. These are the things I chewed on for so long. It's like, okay, well, here's how I can begin to articulate it. I'm an eternal soul. We all are. We're eternal beings.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have origins elsewhere. That place I visited, to me, felt like home. There might be lots of different origins. I don't know. But I believe that this earth is like a school. Like we come away for school, we come here to learn, and we simply come to learn. I mean, that's the thing. There was no judgment, when I was there in those arms. There was only love. And life was like a school. It's like, well, you're there and you had these courses and you had fun at recess, and tell us what you learned, our beloved boy, being you in that realm. And yet the eternal nature of all of us. And that's the thing. It was very personal, but I knew it magnified out to everyone. So yeah, we're eternal souls, and we choose to come here, and we might even have our agenda. Well, I want to learn forgiveness. I want to be forgiving like that creator. And perhaps it was like, well, Jeff, who's the hardest one for you to forgive? Gosh, that'd be me. I have a hard time forgiving myself. So let's create a situation, let's create a situation where in the most poignant way, you learn to forgive yourself. And then it was like, well, Tamara, will you play along? Will you love him enough to leave? And Griffin, will you break his heart in ways he can't even imagine, that he might learn and get what he came? And they said, yeah, we love him that much. We'll do it. And yet we're all connected. The oneness I experienced, we're all here on this stage at school, providing the experiences for the expansion of each other's souls. And yet in the end, we'll learn to love. We'll realize there's only love. And that by loving, we literally create heaven right here. There is nowhere to go. We can do it right here, right now, if we choose joy, if we choose love, if we choose to.
Mm-hmm. Wow. The last time we had the conversation, you said something about before you left to drive,
okay,
that your wife had this, how you say,
yes,
hindsight bias.
Well, she had, it was an interesting thing. I'm glad you brought that up, because we had said goodbye. We were staying at her parents' house, visiting them for Easter. And Monday came, and I went and packed up the car, and I put the kids in their car seats, and and we said our goodbyes, and we were just getting ready to leave. In fact, we were just pulling away from the curve,
Mm-hmm.
And her parents were there on the front porch waving like grandpa and grandma do, and Tamara said, wait. I thought she'd forgotten something. I stopped the car, and she said, I just want to go say goodbye to mom and dad one more time. And, at the time I thought, oh, women, we packed the car, we're on our way, but I stopped the car and I watched. I watched as she ran up, and she not only hugged them, but she kissed them both.
Oh.
And I noticed that. Now, at the time, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal, but in hindsight, wow, that whisper, she just had that little feeling. I stop. I just got to go say goodbye to mom and dad one more time. And in our lives, we all get those whispers, those little intuitions, those little inspirations. And by acting on those, that's magic and profound. But as the day played out, that was the last goodbye.
So do you think that deep inside our soul knows it, and our body just don't recognize that?
Yes, I do believe that. I believe our soul has all the answers. It knows the outline, and yet it operates in free will and choice. We get to choose. We do get to choose. I don't know that anyone's predestined to do anything. There's always choice in the moment, but I believe there's an outline and a game plan, an agenda that our higher self honors, even when our body doesn't realize it, might fight it all the way along.
You mentioned something that the doctor also at the operating room saw your wife. Could you tell us that brief thing?
Oh, no, that's fine. It's a very unique part of my experience. As I was airlifted and life flighted into the trauma center, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, who was the attending ER physician, and one of the nurses actually too. So here's two clinicians, and I've now become friends with Jeff. He shared this with me, and I didn't know him from Adam before the accident. We didn't know each other. I was life flight into the facility, but as they came into the operating room, here's a nurse and a physician, and there was a whole team of 5 surgeons working on me. But he went into the operating room, and he has written a book on this called Not Yet. You can get that on Amazon too. But he saw Tamara, my wife who was killed at the scene. He saw her spirit in the operating room. And he said she was standing in the air above my body, watching over me, and she began to communicate with him. And when I asked him, what was she communicating? He said she was simply sharing her gratitude for everything we were doing to save your life. She knew we had to save you to raise that little boy. And when he said that, I thought, of course, that's exactly what she would do. Of course, that's her. And anyway, he had a profound experience, and he wasn't having a near-death experience. He was alive and well and healthy in the operating room, but both he and one of the nurses saw my wife's spirit in the operating room as they worked on me. You know, so many say, well, the near-death experience is your brain shutting down, or the oxygen's cut off, or it's a release of, you know, some type of THC in the body. And these folks weren't having a near-death experience. They were very healthy and doing their job, but they also had a profound vision or visitation while they worked on me, which I think is, you know, it's unique, and yet I'm sure a lot of people have experiences like that.
But at that time, they did not know that it was your wife, right?
Oh, they knew it was my wife.
Oh.
They did know it was my wife. They just didn't know that I had had a near-death experience. They didn't know who I was. And Jeff O'Driscoll, you may want to interview him. He tells an incredible story where when he saw her, he didn't recognize her, he didn't know her, but his spirit knew that's this guy's wife. He did know that family members had been killed in the accident. They send that report with me so they know the velocity of the accident, you know.
When did you start choosing joy than the guilt? What have you done specifically to heal? We know about the physical, but mentally and spiritually.
I think it took a decade, Marionette. I think it took a decade for me to really heal. And choosing joy, for me, it isn't when I did it. It's like if I do it every day. I mean, every day I have a different opportunity. And I ask myself, am I operating out of fear, or am I operating out of love? And am I choosing joy and peace, or am I choosing panic and despair? I mean, really, we are the creators of our own existence, and our choice and our thoughts and what we choose to decide and feel about things that happen have so much to do with our own groundedness, our own peace, our own joy. And even if something challenging happens, you know, I mean, yeah, I experience pain. I might get mad at that guy on the road that cuts me off in the car. But now I say, oh, thank goodness I can feel anger. What a beautiful anger feels good for a minute. And then, I'll feel happy, 2 minutes from now, I'll have a different emotion. And what a gift. It's all a gift. It's all love. So it's a daily thing. It's not like, once upon a time I chose joy. I chose joy, but I had to continue to choose joy day after day, moment after moment, and even now. That doesn't go away. You're always going to have those choices.
From this experience, what's your message to our viewers that they can learn from, and why did you want to come and speak? Wow.
Now, if I have one message, it is to choose joy, and that it's a choice. We get to choose, and yet alongside with that, the joy is found in the little things. I mean, the little things are the big things. You know, people will say to me, oh, you must have been spared for some, incredible, journey. And I'm like, yeah, I was. It's to play catch with my son. And to feel Tanya's foot, rub up against my leg in the bed, and to watch one more sunset and see one more butterfly and see, I mean, the big things are those little everyday things that are miracles, and there's no small miracle. But
Thank you so much for reminding us about those small things.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing this, Jeff, to our viewers. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being with us here and giving me this opportunity. This is the second time, so thank you for your time. Thank you for your story and sharing to everyone that are watching these videos.
You're so welcome. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.